So today it's all about what's the best thing you can do for your spouse? I'm going to need to think about that for a minute. It would be a lot easier if I could just come up with what he could do for me.
Man, I wish I knew ahead what today's sermon was. I'd have lots of ideas what makes a perfect wife. I could have helped write this sermon.
Of course, I know what Mark would say. If you would just turn off your cell phone when you get home. Guys just don't understand. Girls need to talk to their friends, not guys. They get all upset, head into their little man cave, close the door right behind them, and don't share a word with anyone.
I've got it. My guess for what Sonia would say is, you need to talk to me a lot more. You know, I can't read your mind, but being in sales, it's what I do all day long is talk, talk, talk. Last thing I want to do when I come home is talk.
You know, I think I'm going to take it back on that cell phone. I think Mark would say, if dinner could always be ready, beautifully laid out, every time I walk in the door. But that's never going to happen in nature. We both get off at 5 o'clock from work, and my commute is longer. But that's been a lifelong dream of his.
Of course I know what Sonia would say, you know. I work and I do all the work around the house and everything, and I go to the cleaners, I do the laundry, I pick up your dry cleaning. I don't know. If I could just trade places with her one time, you know, maybe she could do my sales route. Yeah, drive into Los Angeles and fight 3-hour commute in and out, and yeah, that's what would be good. Then she would understand why when I get home, I'm just absolutely beat.
You know, if Mark and I could just reverse roles for one day and walk in each other's shoes, Mark would see me differently. I'm sure of it. Or I might see him differently. I had no idea.
Wow, the view from this side of the pew is sure different. Well, let's do a memo here to myself. About that recent Valentine gift I bought, the crock pot, you know, we're gonna send that back and make dinner reservations.
A man was in a hot air balloon and he was lost. He had promised a friend that he would meet him, and he was running late now and didn't know where he was. So he descended in the balloon till he was about 30, 40, 50 feet above the ground, and he began to survey the landscape. He finally saw a woman walking along a path, and he called out to her, "Ma'am, can you help me?" She looked up and said, "Yes, what can I do for you?" He said, "Can you tell me where I am?" She said, "Yes. You're about 30 feet above the ground, between 38 and 39 degrees north latitude, 43 and 44 degrees west longitude." "Thank you," he said. Thought about it for a moment and then said, "Are you an engineer?" She said, "Yes, I am. How did you know?" And he said, "Well, You told me exactly where I am, information that is absolutely useless to me. I don't know any more about where to go than I did before we talked, and now that we have talked, I'm even more late to my appointment than I was." And she said, "Really? Are you a manager?" He said, "Yes. How did you know?" She said, "Because you have no idea where you are, no idea where you're going. You've made a promise you can't keep. You've managed to rise to great heights because of hot air. You're depending on people beneath you to get things done. And we've barely talked for 2 minutes and you're already blaming it all on me." I don't think either the engineers or the managers applauded. But my purpose is not to be hard on engineers or on managers, but rather to ask you 2 questions about that story. Question number 1, how recently did you have a conversation somewhat similar to that with your spouse? Just how recently? Don't look at the calendar. You may need to look at your watch. How recently? That kind of conversation where you seem to absolutely miss, and yet the temperature rises. That's the first question. Second question, what do those 2 people, that man and that woman, or what do the 2 of you most need that would help bring that conversation to a better conclusion? I want to invite you to take your Bibles and to open them to the Gospel of Luke. Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, page 1535, I believe, in your pew Bible. We're in a series, if you're joining us for the first time today, a series entitled simply, "The Best Thing You Can Do." And today we come to a sermon entitled, "The Best Thing You Can Do for Your Spouse." We've turned to this section, this passage in the Gospel of Luke, because I believe that nestled in the heart of this passage is contained a statement that leads us to the very best thing that you can do, that I can do for our spouses. Now, I know you may be a bit troubled if you've taken your Bible, especially if it's the TNIV, if it's the Pew Bible, because you know that today is about spouses, and yet the section to which we've turned has the heading, "Love for Enemies." And you say, "Randy, what's up with that?" And then someone across the sanctuary says, "I know exactly what's up with that. It's a good passage, leave them alone." But it is here that we find this statement. Now, allow me to set the context. We are about to read from Luke's rendering of what in Matthew we call the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to land right in the heart of the sermon. In fact, we're going to come to a section of the sermon this morning where Jesus is talking about loving those who are unlovely and unlovable. It is in that context that he gives us an insight that while it can apply in many different areas of our lives, certainly can apply to marriage. So read it with me. Luke's Gospel, chapter 6. We will reread what the Ingrams read so well just a few moments ago, beginning with verse 27. It says this, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them. And lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and to the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." It's right at the heart, nestled right at the heart of that passage, comes that statement. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Now that statement, at least its primary sentiment, was not new with Jesus. There were a variety of settings and contexts, and there are from the ancient world where we know that people, even before the time of Jesus, made similar kinds of statements. In fact, if you go back in the Old Testament to Leviticus 19, you will find a very similar statement there. So it's not entirely new with Jesus. But most of the other occurrences of this kind of thinking is different on one significant point. It was the Rabbi Hillel, the famous Jewish rabbi, who was approached apparently in AD 20 by a Gentile who asked Rabbi Hillel a question. He said, "Rabbi, I want to know what the heart of Jewish law is. In fact, I would like to have you summarize Jewish law for me." But apparently this particular Gentile was rather impatient. He couldn't remember very well. So he said to Rabbi Hillel, "Look, please don't give me all these lengthy explanations. I don't want all of that. I'll forget it before I get away from you. What I would like for you to do is to summarize the entire Jewish law in the time that I am able to manage balancing on one foot. Can you do it in that brief an amount of time?" So Rabbi Hillel said to him, "I can." And so, balanced on one foot, he said to the Gentile, "What is hateful to you, do not do to others. This is all the law. All the rest is commentary. Go and learn that." And he got it in. That was his answer. What is hateful to you, do not do to others. That's a very similar statement to many of the other appearances of this sentiment that appear in the ancient world. But they are different from what Jesus had to say in one primary way. They're passive, you see. If you can merely restrain yourself, resist doing something unkind to someone else, you fulfill it. In other words, if you feel like hitting somebody, don't do it. If you feel like saying something, don't say it. If you do that, you will fulfill what Rabbi Hillel in the ancient world said. Jesus takes that sentiment and he turns it to positive action. It is not sufficient with Jesus merely to resist doing something. No. He says not just what you hate, don't do to someone else. No, he says do to others what you wish them to do to you. It requires proactive action. It requires initiative. I will act in a way that is loving. Remember the context of what Jesus is saying. He's talking about love, loving those who are unlovely and unlovable. That's his context for this statement. That's what drives New Testament scholar Darrell Bach to make some interesting statements about this particular passage. Listen to what Bach has to say about the love Jesus speaks of and the culture in which we live. He writes, "Love is many things in our culture. For many, it can be likened to an electric charge. Either the zap of the feeling is there or it is not. For others, love is an arrangement, almost like a contract, sometimes voluntary, other times imposed by circumstances. Love for family members is not a given. Instead, events have necessitated it. In other words, I didn't ask to be born into this family, but here I am. Now I have to love them. Marriages often proceed," he says, "with this kind of arranged love. As long as the contract works and the zap is present, the arrangement is on. Often such love is managed by performance. Love is to be demonstrated by what is done for me. If you really cared for me, in other words, you would do this for me." But Bach thinks that Jesus' words take issue with that. He continues, "This kind of arranged or easy love runs counter to Jesus' description of what love is for the child of God. The love of Jesus is none of those things described above. Jesus decries our culture's version of love. What is required to possess true love is an understanding of what it is to be loved by God and how God wishes us to love others. At the center of Jesus' sermon is a unique concept of love. This love cannot merely be reduced to the golden rule. It is love that is golden even when everything else is not." Catch that last sentence. It is love that is golden even when everything else is not. Do to others, says Jesus, what you would have them do to you. That action, that ethic is based in love. And it is contained therein that I think comes the reality that truly is the very best thing you can do for your spouse. It might be summarized by the word empathy. Empathy. Empathy leads to this action of Jesus, and it grows out of this action of Jesus. Empathy. Now, maybe you ask me, Randy, what exactly is empathy? I've heard the word before. Not sure I could define it. What exactly is empathy? Well, we could define it in different ways. We could go to the dictionary. We could ask the dictionary, what is empathy? And here's how the dictionary would respond. The dictionary would say empathy is the intellectual identification with, or the vicarious experiencing of, the feelings, thoughts, and attitudes of another. That's empathy. Is your heart all aflutter after that definition? You're still sitting there thinking, I don't know, that helps, but I still don't quite get it. Well, maybe we could go to a funeral home. We could slip in the front door, down the hallway, peer in the doorway into a fairly dimly lit room. There we see a man seated alone by the casket of his wife. He is weeping. And then we observe as a colleague comes in from work. These two don't know each other all that well at work. But here he is. His colleague comes in. The man stands up. They embrace. They hold on to each other while tears streak both sets of cheeks. That's empathy. Or maybe you like the authors that say there is a distinction, they say, that we draw between sympathy and empathy. They say sympathy is seeing a drowning person and throwing them a lifesaver. Empathy, they say, is diving in to save the person. That's empathy. Or maybe you would like just a brief, succinct definition. What is empathy? The author, Jess Lair, says, here's what empathy is. He says, empathy is your pain in my heart. Your pain in my heart. That's empathy. Or we could enlarge it to say, it is your joy in my heart. It is your bewilderment in my heart. It is your sadness in my heart. It is anything that is within you that finally resides within me. That is empathy. It seems to me that as I read the words of Jesus, first of all, about loving those who are not particularly lovely, and then when I read what he says about the ethic of how we are to conduct ourselves in that loving manner, do to others as you would have them do to you, you cannot escape the fact that empathy is at the core of all that he has to say. Empathy. I would suggest to you that empathy may be the very best thing that you can give to your spouse. You say, well, why, Randy? Why choose empathy? Of all the other kinds of things that you could choose to say, this is the best thing you could do for your spouse, why choose empathy? The relationship writers, the family therapists, and teachers Les and Leslie Parrott describe being backstage in the green room preparing to go on Oprah's television show for an appearance. Just before they were about to walk out onto the stage, the show's producer came in and told them, now listen, I know Oprah, I know how she works. It is likely that once you get out there, she will ask you a question. It's a question she likes to know. When you get out there, what she will probably ask you is, what is the one single thing that is the most important thing you can do to help your marriage improve? So, said the producer, just be ready because she's very likely to ask you a question like that. Well, listen to what Les and Leslie Parrott write in reflecting on that. They say, we didn't have to think twice. In fact, it wasn't the first time we'd been asked this question. We hear this question a lot in nearly every interview we do in marriage, whether in print, radio, or on television. That question is predictable. Why? Probably because regardless of the topic, we all like to get to the heart of the matter. Think about it. Wouldn't you like to know the most important thing you can do to keep your kids off drugs, to save more time, to extend your life, to prepare a perfect souffle, to stop global warming, to get a promotion? Whatever the topic, we like to know the one key thing. What matters most? What's the essential element, that indispensable and vital factor for success? Then they write, well, when it comes to that crucial component in a successful marriage, there is no need to guess. We stand on a mountain of research and clinical expertise when we tell you the answer. We can tell you the answer, they say, in one word: empathy. It's putting yourself in your partner's shoes. The happiest couples on earth are those who become adept at trading places. Now, the Parrots are far from alone in that sentiment. In fact, just one sentence from Bernard Gurney, the Director of Relationship Enhancement for the Washington, D.C. based Coalition for Marriage, Family, and Couple Education. This is what Gurney says. One sentence. More than any other single deficiency, I think it is the lack of mutual empathy which results in sword drawing in marriage. Did you catch what Gurney said? More than any other single thing. What is it that leads us to draw our swords and go to battle? Lack of empathy. Lack of being able to put ourselves in the other person's situation. Lack of being able to put ourselves in the other person's skin, in the other person's shoes. And isn't that precisely what Jesus is talking about here in this sermon? He is saying, when it comes to expressing love, especially to people who are unlovely, trade places with them. Ask yourself, were you in their situation? What would you like them to do for you? Then Jesus says, do that for them. In Matthew, he adds, this is the summary of all the law and the prophets. Empathy. Trading places. It's been a fair number of years ago now, so I'm surprised I remember it. A fair number of years ago, I was doing some reading, some research, I suppose, in a scholarly journal named Reader's Digest. And so I was doing this research, and I ran across a statement in a little piece about marriage. I don't remember the author. I don't remember the title of the article, but somehow it became lodged in my mind. The author was writing about this very theme. How do you improve your marriage? You know what the author said? Here's my recommendation, said the author. If you want to improve your marriage, ask yourself and answer just one question. If you want to improve your marriage, here's the question the author proposed. If you want to improve your marriage, ask yourself the question, what would it be like to be married to me? Ooh. Did you feel that wave of horror that just swept through our congregation? I'll give you a moment just to settle down from that frightening image. What would it be like to be married to me? I'm thinking, that's why I married you, so I wouldn't have to be married to me. I wouldn't want to do that. Why? The author said, ask yourself that question. As you ask yourself that question and begin to enter into the experience of the answer, you will begin to understand your spouse and begin to understand just why your spouse says and does the things he or she does. You know what the word for that is? Empathy. Empathy. Now, I know it's hard to empathize with others, especially in marriage. I mean, we're so different in so many ways. We have different temperaments, different family backgrounds, different ways of viewing the world. We're different because we're male and female. In fact, on that last one, the difference is between men and women. Some significant ones, some common ones. Let me give you just one example. This is not the case in every marriage, but it is a fairly common difference between men and women. It can be captured in one word, and that word is shopping. Shopping. Do you and your spouse feel the same way about shopping? No. There's the answer. I suspect that resonates in many hearts. Did you hear the story about the older man who was seated on the bench outside the store at the mall, sitting there and waiting when he was approached by a young woman, a reporter who was doing a story for her organization? Came up to him and said, "Sir, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" He says, "I got nothing but time." "You're okay?" "Yeah, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." "All right, well, I just have a few questions to ask you here. What are you doing?" "I'm waiting." "Who are you waiting on?" "My wife." "What's she doing?" "What's she doing? This is a mall. She's shopping." "How long has she been shopping?" "Well," he said, "I'll tell you. When she went in the doors of that store over there, I was 35. "Really?" she said. "Well, I've got to talk to her." So she went in the store and she tracked her down. "Is your husband out there?" "Yes." "Does he look?" "Yeah, that's him." "Okay, I've got to ask you some questions." "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm shopping." "How long have you been shopping?" "Well," she says, "I'll tell you this. When I came in here to shop, I was 35. Now I'm 18. One activity puts one in the grave and resurrects the other. In fact, one of the writers for the Newark Star-Ledger did a poll, did a survey, surveyed a whole group of men. And this is what the writer said. Of all these men that I surveyed, instead of going shopping, 89% of them, 89% of the men I surveyed, said the writer, would prefer, instead of going shopping, to sit at home and watch their own sports team lose. Lose. Rather than go shopping. So you say empathy is really difficult. It's really hard. Absolutely. It's hard because we are so different. We are different, as I said, in many ways. Temperament and background and view of the world and gender, and the list can continue. And so to try to enter into the experience of another person can be very difficult indeed. And yet then we come to the sermon of Jesus, and Jesus is unequivocal in his directive. He says, "Do to others as you would have them do to you." That's his ethic, an ethic based in love, an ethic fleshed out by empathy. So I suppose the question then is, well, exactly how do I do this? How do I experience and express empathy in my marriage? Well, a great little book written by Drs. Les and Leslie Parrott, who I mentioned earlier, is entitled simply Trading Places. Trading Places. In that book, they suggest 3 simple steps for trading places, steps on which I cannot improve. Step number 1, if you want to trade places, if you want to experience and express empathy, they said, is expressed by these words: I see you. I see you. In other words, I look at you. I look at your face, your body language. I look into your soul. I see what it is that you are experiencing. I see you. That's step number 1. I was thinking about that because this past week I had a lecture, and it reminded me of something that occurred years ago. Some of you have heard. I've shared this with a few of you. Something that occurred years ago. Our son Austin was about 5 years old at the time. I had come home from work. I was busy going through the mail, sorting it out, opening things, throwing away the junk mail, setting aside the bills, going through all, and he was trying to tell me, said, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," he said, "listen to me." And I said, I'm listening to you, I'm listening to you. Kept sorting the mail. "Daddy, Daddy, listen to me." Kept sorting the mail. "Daddy," he said it 3 or 4 times, and every time I responded saying, "I'm listening, Austin, I'm listening." And then this boy, about 5 years old, said to me, "Daddy, listen to me with your eyes." I set aside the mail, and I did exactly what the parrots say. I see you. I see you. Step number one. If you're going to experience empathy, you have to know the other person's situation. So temporarily, not permanently, but temporarily set aside your own agenda. Step number two, not only I see you, but step number two, I feel with you. I feel with you. Now that I see what it is that you are experiencing, I feel with you. Have you ever watched what happens with babies? Put a couple of babies in a playpen, in a crib, put a couple of them there. One of them may be happy, enjoying life, playing with his toes, his fingers, discovering his nose, sucking on his bottle. He is copacetic. Life is good. The other one is not so happy. In fact, something happens to the other one that makes that other baby upset. So baby number two finally begins to cry and then begins to wail. Wah! Just lets it fly. Have you watched baby number one? Just stand there and watch baby number one for a few seconds. Looks at that other baby, and then what happens? A few seconds later, baby number one, the happy copacetic child, wah! Begins to wail too. Now you've got two of them on your hands. Did you know that scientists are doing research these days on the brain and on what they call mirror neurons? That we are actually wired to feel sympathetic with those we are close to, with those we love. With tiny filaments attached to the brain, they have watched which ones have lit up in the brains of couples. And this partner is going to get a shot and something lights up in her brain. Do you know what? It lights up in the same area in his brain. Mirror neurons. We have the capacity to feel with each other. We are even wired that way, it seems. I see you. I feel with you. Third step, I act to help you. Now that I have seen what situation you're in, now that we are mirroring one another's feelings, now I take action. The mirroring of one another's feelings is the empathy. The taking action is Jesus saying, do to others what you would have them do to you. It's hard to do, but what a difference it makes. David Kingsrider. David was a tight end for the Minnesota Vikings back in the 70s. Kingsrider tells of the experience of being at his in-law's house and getting trapped there by an ice storm. Probably not unlike some of the ones we've had of late. There they were at their in-laws. The ice storm came in. They couldn't go anywhere. This was in the day and age before a lot of the technology that we have today. And so he said, here we were, stuck at my in-law's house, 3 solid days with nothing to do. And so, says Kingsrider, since we didn't have anything to do, we watched family movies. He said, we watched every family movie they had ever made. Over that 3-day period, says Kingsrider, I watched my wife grow from a tiny little baby to a toddler, to an adolescent, to a teenager, and finally to the woman I love today. He said, after 3 days of watching her in that one compact experience grow up, everything I felt for her deepened and changed. In fact, he said, I can tell you with truth, I have treated her with much greater respect ever since. Because he saw her, felt with her, got into her skin, into her world, knew her experience, and it affected the way he responded. I act to help you. So we can ask, what is the best thing you can do for your spouse? And we can turn to the words of Jesus, words where Jesus is talking about how we are to relate ourselves to those who are unlovely and unlovable. And he urges us to a consistent, persistent type of love. But nestled at the heart of those words, he says, do to others as you would have them do to you. It's a command that can only be lived out based in the high principle of love, bathed in ample amounts of empathy. But do you know what? I suspect if we find some way to enter into our spouse's life and experience and skin and shoes. I suspect that something profoundly good can happen in our marriages. I suspect, in fact, that people, not just the people out there, but the people who know us best, our children, our families, our friends, will come to look at us and will come to say, you know what? There's a marriage. There's a marriage where clearly there is love.